All right, welcome to another episode of God Yay or Nay. I'm here with Jasmine Virdi. Jasmine, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Oh no, this is gonna be fun. Psychedelics are probably my favorite topic, and you're very immersed in the world, and you're a writer about it, and you've written so many great articles about it. I do wanna, I do kind of want to know a little bit about your background. Like, why did you come into writing psychedelics, and what's your purpose in your writing?
Yeah, well, why did I come into writing about psychedelics? For the longest time, I've been interested in mysticism since like my early teens or before that. And I guess that turned me onto psychedelics in the first place. And so I think after, working with different medicines over the years, I just had this feeling that I would love to work in some capacity with psychedelics, but I didn't know in what capacity. And I think I've always felt an affinity for language, and I've loved reading my whole life. And books and language have helped to change and inspire me in my life. So I think it kind of seemed like a natural progression, like, oh, well, I'm naturally good at, with language. I really wanted to work with psychedelics. And I mean, I was kind of on the fringe or the peripheries of the psychedelic scene for some time, like, going to certain courses and meeting people at conferences. And I think in the past, I had always felt like like a little bit of an outsider, because a lot of the people I was surrounded by were like studying to be like psychotherapists or psychologists or neuroscientists, and I'm like, but I'm not in the sciences. So um, yeah, I ended up writing about psychedelics. But
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. And where did you like go to school, and like where did you like first start even like experimenting with psychedelics?
I studied in Scotland, in Glasgow. Um, yeah, at the University of Glasgow. And I guess before I ever started university, like, I grew up in Cyprus, which is a small island in the Mediterranean, really close to Turkey and Israel and Lebanon. So it's kind of closer to the Middle East. But I grew up there, and just it's a really small place. And I started becoming like interested in like alternative ideas. And as I mentioned, I was like previously interested in mysticism and spirituality before I was ever interested in psychedelics. And
Hmm.
I think I used to spend a lot of time on the internet in my teenage years, and I discovered this YouTube channel called Neuro Soup. I forget the woman that ran it, Crystal something, but she would talk about LSD and so many other topics. But one of the videos of hers that I stumbled on was about LSD, Carl Jung, and the concept of the Godhead. And I was about, 16 or 15 at the time. And it just like, I was like, ooh, there are substances that can make you experience what I'm trying to get to by like, spiritual practice. So it just fascinated me from then on. And I read a lot about psychedelics. But growing up in Cyprus, at least at the time, I wasn't connected with anyone that could like provide me access to these things, or I didn't know how to go about it. And so um, yeah, I kind of thought, well, when I'm ready, they'll come to me. And so it was in my second year of university that I someone presented me with the opportunity of like accessing some psilocybin mushrooms. And so I bought a substantial amount and had a very large dose experience by myself. I mean, I had had a smaller experience at a festival, but I really didn't like it because I think there's something, maybe, I don't know, it depends on the festival you go to. But for me, there's something about certain festival culture or just drug culture where people are kind of ingesting to annihilate themselves or something to escape. And
Hmm.
I had this small dose of psilocybin mushrooms at this festival and just felt really alone. And I had also read so much about psychedelics beforehand. I had this idea of like, oh, I'm going to have this big spiritual experience. And like, I didn't take enough and it wasn't the right setting. And so some months later, I decided, okay, well, yeah, I'd like to explore with psilocybin. I lived alone, and Yeah, it was a very beautiful, intentional experience, but it was a high dose, and I would never kind of advocate for anyone else to do that by themselves.
So basically, like the Terrence McKenna hero dose is what you're talking about?
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't through listening to Terrence McKenna that I decided to take that dose. I think I just kind of like I had ingested 3 grams, and I was sitting like meditating for a while, you know, after having ingested those 3 grams. And I think, you know, maybe a mistake from remembering my last experience and feeling like, oh, it wasn't enough and it didn't like take me to where I needed to go. And, you know, I was like, well, I had another 3 grams in a jar. Like I'd carefully measured out these things beforehand as well. And I don't know, I just felt in that moment called to eat the other 3 grams where, and, you know, it's just, that's what my intuition, you know, called me to do. Whether it
Yeah.
was right or not, I don't know, but it was a choice I made.
And do you think that experience kind of like changed you, or like sent you on this path a little bit?
Oh, totally.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think after that, it just became like, well, how I became so fascinated with the, well, psychedelic substances and plant medicines, because I was like, well, how can like a plant or a chemical make you experience something like that? Like, how is this realm of human experience possible? And for me at the time, it had kind of just shattered my whole idea of what reality was. And so it was very formative. And I was like, well, this is so profound. I felt compelled to learn more. And I guess I've devoted a large portion of my life to kind of investigating these things.
No, that's actually amazing. And I know what you're talking about. Like we can have one of those experiences, and then all of a sudden, like it just kind of switches, like which direction you think you're gonna go in, because you're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I know that feeling of like, how the hell can like a substance do this to you? And like you're like, what the hell did I just experience? And yeah, and also that whole thing you said about setting, like setting and psychedelics is so important. And like I can understand being at a festival and also being your first time and you have an expectation of what these things are supposed to
Mm-hmm.
do, and like that just completely just like destroys your expectation. Like I know exactly what you're talking about. So you now like you kind of like travel with like your psychedelic use kind of too. Like are you like, I guess I would say like you go to different spots and like actually see like the ceremony behind these psychedelics and the history and stuff. Is that a correct way of putting it?
I think I've spent a lot of time in Mexico and like a small amount of time in Brazil, but that's about it. I think for me, traveling is something, I don't know, maybe related to my love for psychedelics, but I think I just love traveling also. And yeah, I tend to live a more nomadic kind of lifestyle. And so, yeah, this is where I am right now kind of thing. And it's just, yeah, I mean, it had been one of the reasons that called me to go to Mexico. And I planned on traveling through like Central and South America thereafter well, last time I came here, but I just ended up falling in love with this country and just falling in love. So I guess it was
Hmm.
Mexico. So yeah.
That's a beautiful country.
And it's so rich with spiritual tradition as well. That's something I love about it.
Where in Mexico are you right now?
I'm living in San Miguel de Allende. It's a town in the state of Guanajuato. It's an old colonial town and a UNESCO World Heritage Site just because of the colonial architecture in the center of town. It's really beautiful here,
No, no, that
but
sounds
very
amazing.
dry. I'm like, yeah, missing the water.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Uh-huh.
So I do want to know, like, when you like, because in a lot of your writing, it seems like you have like a real understanding of like some of the ceremony and indigenous like practices behind these like substances. Like, so maybe we can just start with like Brazil in particular. You said you went to Brazil and like you studied in like an ayahuasca course down there, and
Yeah, there's a course put on, I mean, now it's probably changed because of COVID, but by the University of Campinas in Sao Paulo, they do like I guess for them it's a winter course, but for, you know, the southern, well, the northern hemisphere, it's a summer course. So but they put on like I think it was about a week-long course covering all these different aspects of ayahuasca. So it was kind of like, and I went, now it was in 2017, but I mentioned that, you know, I had this sense of, in the past, feeling a little bit out of place in the psychedelic community, because I went to this course and everyone on the course is like a neuroscientist, a pharmacologist, you know, a botanist. And I was like, well, I studied linguistics, you know, so I didn't know necessarily how, you know, how I could contribute to that space at the time. But yeah, it was a week-long course about like the pharmacology of ayahuasca, the toxicology of ayahuasca, the ethnobotany, anthropology. It was like, yeah, very intensive and full packed. But at the end of that week, you know, we as students got to experience like an ayahuasca ceremony. And the first thing that I realized is like, oh, you can learn so much about these kind of plants, but we really know nothing, you know?
Yeah, because like at the end of the day, that experience is like, yeah, it just
Mm-hmm.
kind of completely mind blowing and just shatters everything you kind of
Exactly.
know, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess like learning about like all of that, like the kind of like the biochemistry and stuff that takes place with like ayahuasca, like I know that's like probably really valuable. Like, did they
Mhm.
each teach you a little bit about like the ceremony behind it and the like indigenous
Well,
roots behind it?
I think in Brazil there are two ayahuasca churches, and ayahuasca use is legal under religious freedom laws for those churches to use. So there's the Santo Daime and the União de Vegetal, which is like the union of the plant, or the union of the two plants, let's say. And yeah, so the people that go to those churches aren't necessarily indigenous. Maybe they were started, I think especially Santo Daime was started like by some of the, you know, African slaves that had been brought to Brazil to work as rubber cutters, you know, and they kind of met some of these indigenous traditions and formed like syncretic churches that, so they're quite different practices. And to be honest, I'm sad to say, but I haven't yet experienced ayahuasca with an indigenous group. It's more so just been like, yeah, neo-shamanic facilitators, or in this more like Santo Daime context. But yeah, the Santo Daime context I experienced either wasn't necessarily a traditional context either, because I think they're, you know, they usually wear uniforms. There's usually such a specific structure to their ceremonies. They're usually with the lights on and all of these things. So they're very different actually from what people conceive of as an ayahuasca ceremony, because I think ayahuasca has kind of made its way to the West through its association with shamanism and things like that. So we think, oh, like lying down in a dark maloca, you know, throwing up into a bucket, where these ceremonies are quite different. They're like
Okay.
singing Christian hymns.
And really? Okay. So like
Mm-hmm.
when I first started doing ayahuasca, it was from the Shipibo tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and that's I don't know if that it was Peru where I figured it out. I don't know where else it is, but yeah, like that's pretty much it. Like we're in a maloka, which is basically just like kind of like a jungle tent, like a big room kind of thing where all of us can lay down. We're in the dark, we throw up. They sing Ikaros, which are like basically like the tribal
Mm-hmm.
songs that like are kind of made from like I guess like thousands of years of like just making these songs. But like, what's kind of like the difference then like in these ceremonies? Because you're saying they're singing like hymns, like it's more like an actual like kind of like has like roots in like the church or what?
Okay, well, it's the syncretic church. So there are aspects borrowed from Christianity. The same with like the Native American church. It's like considered a syncretic church. Like you know, they use their sacrament, but some of their practices also are borrowed from Christianity in some way. You know.
Hmm. Okay. Oh,
Mm.
that's pretty interesting. And like, how many
Yeah.
times have you tried ayahuasca?
Ayahuasca is the substance that I've worked with probably the least. I've experienced more peyote, especially being in Mexico.
Hmm.
Um, but Yeah, I think ayahuasca all but 3 times.
Okay.
And yeah, they've all been in like very different kind of contexts, but the two of them were in like a neo-shamanic context. Um,
Okay. And
yeah.
did it, do you think it affects the trip a little bit? I guess that's a hard question to ask because every trip is very different, but like, do you think, like, we always say setting does give it a kind of like a flavor to the trip almost. Like, did you feel that with ayahuasca in the different settings?
Oh, definitely. Like the first experience that I had was a very beautiful experience. It was really, really wonderful in so many ways and self-revelatory, but I think like, the energy of that experience wasn't held as well as it maybe could have been. And so, yeah, I think there were certain elements of it, like seeing someone else, in discomfort, and that being like, yeah, a challenging thing for me because maybe that situation wasn't, yeah, I mean, it was handled well, but maybe it could have been handled a different way if the energy was held a different way. So I think it does make a really big difference.
Hmm. And I completely understand what you say. And I'm just saying for my audience, you mind like kind of actually expanding on that? Like, what do you mean by like the energy held like during a ceremony?
Well, I think anyone who is a facilitator of a ceremony needs to have a capacity for holding space for other people, because in a plant medicine ceremony, whether it's ayahuasca or psilocybin or even, it could be MDMA, whatever kind of, psychedelic or medicine ceremony you are engaged in, there are always people that are going to have different experiences. And sometimes it's hard to, in the medicine state, sometimes it's hard to verbally communicate with someone for a while. Sometimes, um, you know, like even an experienced practitioner, the first ceremony I went to, I watched a guy who was a really experienced practitioner actually have a really bad time. He was kind of like, um, he just kind of keeled over on the floor and he was convulsing. And I think when I looked at him, I saw his whole body kind of disfigured or dismembered, and like it was all kind of like his head was severed and his arms and legs, and it was a reflection of the bad time that he was having. And I think, yeah, that there needs to be someone or people there who are equally experienced, and there were, but I think that those people in this specific ceremony had a lot of other things to navigate, and maybe, this guy needed some different support in that moment. He was fine in the end. And but yeah, there are also like tools and technologies that one can use in ceremonies, and I think like shamans or shamanic practitioners often use the smoke of tobacco or different herbs, and things like rapé or japé, which is like a snuff tobacco mixed with the ash of different plants. So I mean, there are all of these tools, and it also, I think, is really important for like ceremonial practitioners to hold the space in terms of like keeping everyone together, because there could be a person who yeah, for some reason or other, they just decide, oh, they're going to go and walk off over here in this direction. And if they're supported, maybe they do need time on their own for a minute. But I think like the way I see ceremonies is kind of like a group prayer. It's about the community, and we're all praying together, and we might have our own individual healing to do, but there's like by keeping everyone together in the same prayer circle, you're kind of concentrating that energy. And if you let all these people, just go off, the prayer is kind of like, yeah, it's not collectively held, it's disparate in some way.
Yeah, no, that's actually wonderfully said. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, one thing I also liked how you were saying is like how it's crazy how many different like plant substances that we can use like with ceremony to like help in the ceremony. Like you were saying, tobacco is one of the main ones, and if you have like that organic tobacco that they use in ceremonies, like the smoke they say has like such a spiritual component to it. I'm not 100% sure the exact use of the tobacco, but I remember there were also like, when I was at an ayahuasca ceremony, there were also like a lot of different like plant essences and stuff. And like, if you were like completely out of your head and you're like freaking out, like, oh my God, like this ayahuasca trip's way too intense, like they would just let you like smell this one plant. I think it was spruce. I'm not even remembering which one it was, but it was like just a plant and you smell it. And all of a sudden it just brings you right back into your body and grounds you completely. And you're just like, how the hell did that even work? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But no, yeah, thanks for sharing that, because that is one aspect of those ceremonies that I just find so fascinating, right?
And even Icaros themselves are like, you know, well, they're tools in a way, those songs, to bring you back or to take you in a certain direction. And music itself in ceremony becomes a tool.
And yeah, like my last time I did ayahuasca, I finally, because I've been working with it for years, and like finally, like I actually started to like feel the Icaros. So for people who don't know, Icaros is the music the shamans are singing, and sometimes they'll come right up to you, and like the way they describe it, like I was talking to the shaman, and he was describing it as like, when he looks at you, he sees like different patterns, like geometric patterns, and like he can see where your energy's off. So like when he sings into you, he's just trying to like ease your energy and like actually let it flow properly. And I felt it for the first time in my last ceremony, where like I felt him singing into me, and like I felt like me just opening up and my energy starting to move, and like I actually like got up when I was laying down, because it was just so powerful. And I was just like, yeah, to just see like how this can be used as a tool. And yeah, that's probably why linguistics is probably a great thing to be a part of going into the psychedelic community. So okay, like now let's I want to talk a little bit about peyote as well. This is something I have zero experience with, and I just want to kind of know what drawed you to it. Why do you think you ended up using that a little bit more for your healing?
Yeah, I think it maybe is in some way kind of just circumstantial. It just happened to be, well, actually, I went to the desert here, San Luis Potosí. There's an indigenous group in Mexico called the Huirrárica, but they're also commonly referred to as the Huicholes or Huichol. And yeah, they are the only indigenous group in Mexico that work with peyote currently, and their sacred place, the birthplace of peyote, is the desert Wirikuta, or as they call it, but it's a big region. So Las Margaritas is there, and a few other places. But I ended up going to Las Margaritas kind of on a road trip, and I didn't really eat peyote on that trip, but just spending time in the desert, I just felt very connected to it. And obviously, like, you know, you can walk around, and it's crazy also how the plant will reveal itself to you if you leaving some offerings there and things like that. So I came back from this trip, and I had a dream of a blue deer, and the blue deer is sacred in their tradition. Peyote grew in the footsteps of the blue deer, and so I had a dream of this deer, and then it just happened the next week. Someone said, "Oh, you know, I'm going to this peyote ceremony, and would you like to join me?" So, okay, I felt like it was like an invitation from, you know, more than my friend, the universe, in a way. I kind of feel like life is like that. It invites you to participate in it in certain ways. So I decided to go to this ceremony, and it was just so beautiful and profound. And yeah, since then I have been to several others, and it's just a really beautiful gentle medicine in one way. I find it, for me, my experiences with peyote have been like less visionary than an ayahuasca experience, you know, more grounded, and yeah, just being able to work with like things on a somatic bodily level.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just love the format of the ceremonies that I've been to. And I've been to ceremonies mostly with Huichol or Wiraraka Maracames, which is their word for like man of knowledge, or shaman, medicine man, if you like.
Okay.
And so, yeah, these ceremonies that I went to, and of course, I think they're slightly like adapted for Westerners in some way, or just like, you know, mestizo people also.
Yeah.
Um, so, but they last all night long. So, you know, you start the ceremony at like 9 p.m. and you finish it like after the sun rises. And they're quite intense physical work in some way, to be sitting up all night. And depending on the maracame, like I don't know, at least the one that I sat with a couple of times in ceremony, like he was a more strict maracame, and, you know, you shouldn't lie down in the ceremony. You shouldn't take your shoes off because it was kind of disrespectful. There's a certain way to move around the circle. And what I really loved about it, though, is that there's a point in which, you know, the maracame opens up the circle for anyone who wants to share or pray in some way. And so it feels like more, maybe it's just a very cohesive experience where you're like connecting with this group of people. And yeah, you just kind of pray or share what's in your heart in those moments. And just for me, connecting with my own intentionality in that space, and having other people witness it, it was just so profound. And so that's what led me to, you know, pursue that more.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I couldn't imagine sitting up all night. That's one thing with ayahuasca. I usually drink it and just lay right down. So you're saying it's a little bit more of a gentler experience, right? And like a little bit more grounding.
Grounding, yeah. I mean, it can also be like, you know, forceful, like hard in some ways. I think you get the medicine you need or the experience you need.
Of
But
course, yeah.
yeah, I feel like in terms of like, well, I've experienced peyote and also San Pedro, which is another mescaline containing cactus, or
Mhm.
wachuma, it's also called,
Yeah.
which is indigenous to or native to Peru, I believe. But the times that I've experienced, like, you know, mescaline as opposed to like you know, ayahuasca, which contains DMT, is, I just find it's just a little bit less. Ayahuasca is very visionary for me. I don't know. I think it must be different for many people, but I think the DMT has a quality in which there's just this like alien world revealed, and I just feel like it's quite different with like, you know, mescaline containing plants.
Yeah, and I like the one thing I've noticed, and I've heard a lot of people talk about, like all these plants kind of have their like, and like I think the natives would call it spirit. Like they would say like
Yeah.
every plant has its spirit, and you know, sometimes the more I get involved in it, I sometimes start using that language a little bit more. Like I guess with my Western mind, I always used to be like, yeah, these plants all have their little flavor and stuff, but like now it kind of does sometimes feel like it has its like own spirit behind it. And you're right, like ayahuasca to me has like kind of a alien vibe to it, like something a little bit outer to it. I always feel that a different kind of presence that's just like, yeah, it's hard to explain, but it's just like completely out of this world when I'm on it. But you say like yeah, how do you kind of look at that, like that whole idea of like kind of like the different spirits behind the plants and the substances?
Yeah, like I've heard a lot recently, like the argument that, you know, synthetic substances and their like chemicals are kind of, yeah, identical to the plants. And I don't know, I think I'm more of a transpersonalist, like I'm more spiritual. And I think for in my own beliefs, I do believe that these plants have their own spirits, you know, and we're kind of communicating with them to some extent.
Mhm.
As opposed to it's just kind of like a result of pharmacology. But I think also, like, pharmacologically speaking, like if you were to eat like synthetic mescaline versus like Peyote or San Pedro, I think that of course it would have a slightly different effect because there are so many other alkaloids in both cacti, and I think they could probably come together to, have some kind of synergistic effect that is maybe we just haven't studied or something like that. So I think in one sense there, pharmacologically these things you would have a slightly different experience maybe, or it might be subtle, but I also think like also spiritually there's a value.
Yeah, I agree completely actually. Even with like ayahuasca, I know like now everybody's like DMT, like smoking DMT has become like a very popular thing. I've never tried it, but yeah, from like just listening to people's experiences with it, it just seems like two very, very different trips. And I can't say too much about smoking it, but like I don't think it's nearly as transformative because you're talking about all of a sudden like going from a 6-7 hour ayahuasca experience where like the changes happen slowly, and like usually you can like remember a lot of your experience afterwards. You go into like a 15-minute experience where you just smoked it, which is so intense, like usually you come back and you don't really remember most of it. So like yeah, I think there's definitely something to say about like taking it compared to like just like refining it down to like just the chemical and taking it.
Yeah, I mean, DMT is also smokable like in a natural form, which comes from, well, there's two types of DMT. So there's NN dimethyltryptamine, which is the DMT found in ayahuasca and many plants, but then there's 5-MeO DMT. And that one is found in a toad called Bufo alvarius. And so that toad, they milk the secretions of the toad or like its glands, and it produces this secretion as like a stress response. And anyway, so that drying the secretion and it dries into a powder, you can smoke that powder. And so I think that's a very kind of common thing nowadays, and that is a natural DMT smoking trip. But 5-MeO has it has a different feel to it than NN dimethyltryptamine, like smoking the two, in the sense that I don't know, I've heard other people and also myself like I would describe it as like this very golden white light experience of like just God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, just this complete like merging and nothingness or oneness. I don't know whether like just regular DMT smoking that, it's just been like, oh, here's a praying mantis which is coming to abduct you and put you in a strange room and try sensations out on you, like so they're very different experiences.
Yeah, I don't know which one I would prefer. So you tried the natural one too from like the extract?
I personally haven't tried Bufo. I've tried a synthetic version of it. So, again, like I can't say the difference between the two, but I've only tried the synthesized version. But I think also nowadays there are people like pushing for the synthesized version, or maybe like a fringe group of people, because like these toads are becoming endangered.
Yeah, damn. All right. And I heard like even with peyote, like you saying that's kind of becoming endangered too. I read in one of your articles.
Yeah, it's considered a vulnerable species, but I think at the local level in like the state of Texas, it's considered like endangered at the local level.
Okay.
But yeah, I think researchers have been like talking about the endangerment of peyote since the 1960s. I think like many like hippies got turned on to peyote through the works of Aldous Huxley, like his Doors of Perception, in which he, ingests mescaline, the active compound in peyote, and also the works of Carlos Castaneda, who wrote what was it, The Teachings of Don Juan. He has a series of books that are amazing. And anyways, that's kind of like tangential, but so I think people through those through that literature got turned on to like the psychoactive properties of peyote. And actually, I spoke for that article that you're referring to. I wrote for Psychedelics Today. It's called Indigenous Voices in Peyote Conservation. But I spoke to an Indigenous woman. She's a Shoshone researcher researching, I guess, peyote habitats, like populations at the University of Idaho, I think. But she actually said to me that there is a plant, I think it's called astrophytum or astro. I need to get back to you with the name. It looks just like very, very similar to peyote. And so I think in the 1960s, when a bunch of, people went to the desert seeking this mystical plant, that they mistook this astrophytum plant for peyote. And so they drove those populations into near, not extinction, but, they made those populations of that plant endangered. And so she was kind of saying, in a way, this other plant took a hit for peyote. But yeah, I guess as we continue to traverse the psychedelic renaissance, more and more people are interested in these compounds. Like, yes, people go to the desert and try to find peyote is one reason why there might be dwindling populations. But I think there's so many other reasons, like, it's mostly, it's also exploitative kind of land practices or land management practices. So, turning habitats into farmland or building wind turbines, mining for gas and oil, all of these kinds of things are disrupting the natural habitat.
Makes sense. Yeah. No, that's interesting. All right. So like you did mention the cultural or the psychedelic renaissance, which is like it is true. Like right now, it seems like this is just becoming like more like in the cultural zeitgeist right now, and everyone's like thinking about it, like maybe trying it. Lots of people are trying it for the first time. Like when like if you were giving advice to people who are just getting into this and like they are going to go and they want the like full experience of a ceremony and they want to heal or they want to like get in touch with themselves or whatever there is, like what's like your advice to them to like maybe to prepare for a journey or and like set an intention for a journey and like even prepare for the backside of the journey for like the integration and everything?
Mm-hmm. But you're talking about ceremonial use specifically, or kind of just like also self-exploration with psychedelics?
I think I would say like a little bit of both, like more of just like not using it in like a party way or like
Yeah, not
but like
not
using it,
recreational.
yeah, using it for like a self development or self exploration kind of way.
Yeah, I would say like, well, psychedelic integration is kind of a new term, but it's kind of like an older concept, which is kind of embedded in transpersonal psychology more broadly. And Ken Wilber has spoken a lot about like, integration as well. So I think for me, especially with psychedelic integration, I think it should start with preparation. Like if you're wanting to have an experience in like a self exploratory kind of therapeutic capacity, whether it be in ceremony or by yourself, with a sitter, I think it's really important to look at your intention for wanting to work with a given medicine, journaling about that intention and going into it, because I think when you are in that state, if you are able to remember your intention, it kind of serves as like a grounding anchor. You're kind of like, oh, I remember why I'm here, and it's really helpful in that way. But also I would say if you're going to do it outside of a ceremonial context, it's really important to think about your set and setting, like where will you have this experience? And I mean, set can refer to like your mindset primarily, like in the moment that you're going to enter that experience. So it's like a short-term mindset, but it can also be like longer term things, like throughout your life, like what is there any like disposition that you have? Is there anything that you struggle with in a deep way? And like, the more that you're conscious about these challenges that you have, I think sometimes the experience can be easier, because I think the things that we tend to avoid in our lives tend to manifest themselves in psychedelic experiences. So if there's a part of yourself which you're like, evading or pushing away, it tends to kind of surface in that state. And so it's just helpful to have to have the willingness to look into yourself before such an experience and look at these things and embrace them also.
And honestly, like even the way you said that, it's kind of perfectly encapsulates like what I went through like during my like sitting with ayahuasca, like over the experiences, like the first two or three, I guess I would be like really nervous, really anxious going into the experience, and like a lot of times I would be like resisting, like actively resisting the experience. Like when I had sensations or when stuff that came up was like a little too much, I'm trying to push it away. But like after having a few ayahuasca experiences and actually realizing like just how profound it was, and just being like, oh, like this is like there's something like so much deeper to that, it gave me like a trust in the medicine, and then that trust allowed me to like accept the experiences as they came up and just allowed it to be. And that allowed me to like just get a lot more deeper like experiences and information from like the medicine, like what it's trying to show me. And it really did help. Like did
Yeah, trust and the willingness or the ability to learn to let go. I think that's also a big thing. It can feel so scary in those states to actually just let go. So I also think maybe like, practicing some kind of breath work, whether it's kind of just meditation or just like learning to connect with your breath also before engaging in a psychedelic experience, even if it's on such a rudimentary level. I think in those states when things get difficult, just remembering like, oh, I can breathe, like I can come back to my breath, and it's another thing that's anchoring and rooting, and helps you get through the difficulty, because you might have an experience where you're just like, you actually feel like you're going to die, and you feel your whole self-concept strip away. That's what my first big psilocybin experience was, and I've never had such a potent experience to this day, even with other medicines. I think for me, just I was kind of gripped by this sense of, well, I went through a complete ego death or dissolution, and as I felt all of myself begin to fall away, and I couldn't use language anymore, and I was trying to like express something even to myself out loud, but I couldn't. And actually, my mother's brother, one of them is schizophrenic, and so I thought, oh, damn, well, I'm just going to be like him for the rest of my life. I'll have this deep understanding of the world, but no one will be able to understand me. And then as I got beyond madness, I was like, well, I'll probably die alone in this flat, this today. And like going through all of these things, I think you just have to kind of surrender to them, even if they're the most terrifying thing that you could imagine in that moment. But I've also heard, like, I don't know if you know Synthesis Institute, but Dan Kaiman, their lead facilitator, I've also heard him saying, like, maybe letting go and surrendering and like walking into the darkness isn't always the right thing. And like, he talks a lot about like, well, I guess faith-informed psychedelic therapy. He probably doesn't use those words, but, so I think he gives the example of, well, if someone's a Christian, like maybe they're not going to like go and embrace the devil or, let go and kind of walk into the arms of the devil. If that's what they're seeing, maybe they're going to pray. So I think that response of how to deal with difficulty in psychedelic experiences could also just be faith and culture specific too.
Yeah, no, 100%. And for me, like learning to like just pay attention to my breath is what was my main anchor when those times get really tough. But yeah, like you said, like if you do enough of these psychedelics, like eventually you're going to have that ego death experience, which is extremely tough to go through, but can be one of the most like fundamental changes in your life, and just like it can be so good for you and healthy for you. Um, but yeah, even in those situations, like it does get rough for me when it happened to me. Like it was really really rough, and then like um it wasn't even a surrendering, it was just like an acknowledgement of what was happening. And then that's kind of when it was on
Mhm.
ayahuasca, that's when I just started like a really huge purge. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like yeah, I don't know, like what, how do you look at the psychedelic world now, like kind of like the culture behind it, where it's going? Like I think you're more in like in tune with it than I am. Like what do you see as like things that you're really happy about, or maybe things that you might be a little bit more like maybe not like averse about, but just like a little concerned about?
Yeah, I think like in the psychedelic community overall, I think there's just so many amazing, like wonderful, good-hearted people kind of working in this space. And that's, I think for me, one of the greatest things I love about working in this space is that people are just very like genuine and wanting to do something good for the world. And that's why they're so kind of passionate about psychedelics, because they believe they can make a change. Um, and so I think that's one of, I mean, the people kind of at the forefront of this movement, I think generally are pretty good people. But I also think like as anything begins to kind of take root in the mainstream, there's or like people just come in the space because they want to make money out of it. And I
Mm.
think the people at the core of the psychedelic movement, you know, they're just generally like trying to push these medicines forward because they generally believe that they can be healing. But you know, now you have like lots of venture capitalists in the psychedelic space and like big pharma moving in, and yeah, people experimenting. Like I think DARPA invested or like $27 million to looking at how to, I forget exactly what it was, but you know, how to make a tripless version of psilocybin. So there's a lot of like these tinkering with these substances, and you know,
Mm.
and patenting also. Like I think people, there has been an attempt to like file a patent for psilocybin, and I think that's just like
Yeah,
terrible
that's
and
so bad.
saddening because it, you know, like psilocybin mushrooms are used by the Mazatec of Oaxaca. You know, they're also indigenous to certain places in Europe. Like, you know, maybe we've forgotten those traditions like associated with those mushrooms, but I think that yeah, I just don't want this movement to be like co-opted by big pharma and just the people with the money, because I think so, like I don't know much about the cannabis movement and the cannabis space, but I think that is something that also happened to the cannabis space. You know, they're like this core group of people who are super like idealistic and really believe in the cause and really fight for it. And then once it started to like gain more traction, it's like all of the people with more money somehow like push those original people out of the movement and
Yep.
kind of like co-opt the space. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
right
that's,
now, oh
I
sorry.
think, oh no, that's the major thing that concerns me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it is kind of like interesting right now, because like what happened to marijuana, like you are seeing it happen, like psilocybin, MDMA are the next ones I think on the line, and then who knows what comes after that. But
Mhm.
you are seeing this, and like now we're talking about doing like psychedelic therapy, which like I love the idea of it, and it's gonna like, I hope like these kind of things like progress. But like yeah, one of my other guests was kind of like she was telling me just the idea of just having like a therapist who's never tried any of these substances, like giving
Yeah, that's
these,
also,
yeah, like giving these substances to a person to like do therapy with, and it's just kind of like that in itself is just like a little weird to me.
Yeah, I definitely think if you're going to be a psychedelic therapist, you need to have like the first-hand experience. I mean, that's a contentious topic also, because I think the way that the like medicine works generally, for example, if you're a psychiatrist and you're giving like antipsychotics to someone who has schizophrenia, like you don't try those drugs yourself. So I think the model that we have currently, like when it comes to psychedelics, it just doesn't no longer, well, it no longer works.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I also think, like, you know, I'm 100% for like the medicalization of these substances, because I think like they can help people in so many ways. But I also feel like, I just hope that that medicalization doesn't kind of jeopardize like people's ability to use them, you know, without having like some sort of medical condition to start with. Like I'm interested in like humanistic psychology and how, like, you know, the betterment of well people also, you
Mm-hmm.
know, how these substances can benefit me or you, or, you know, anyone who so desires to work with them, um, outside of a medical model, because I think that has a lot of value too.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree completely. Yeah, I like, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see like the future of like what happens with these substances, because it is yeah, these things are starting to blow up, and you're right, big money's coming into it. Like there's already like psilocybin and MDMA stuff that's on the stock market, like you can invest in them. So like
Hmm.
yeah, like even in that, when you're looking at that, and I got a little money in the psilocybin, I'm not gonna lie, but I don't know if that's
It's
right or
not all
not.
bad. It's not all bad.
um, okay, so before we're almost done here, but
Hmm.
let's ask a little bit of a bigger question. I know this is a little bigger, but like I know with psychedelics, like especially in indigenous cultures, they've always been used as like kind of like a rite of passage. Like you get to a certain age, and like now you're going to take these, and this is going to help you like grow into that next stage. And this is kind of what they've been used for like thousands of years in a lot of cultures. Um, Now that you see like these substances becoming so mainstream and so many people are using them, like do you see sometimes like I know like Terence McKenna kind of talks about this idea, but like do you see this as like kind of like a transformation for like maybe even societies, or maybe like not just individuals, but like just moving like a society to different places? Like do you see like this whole rise of psychedelics kind of like coinciding with like a societal shift?
I mean, it's a really difficult question, but
It
I
is.
think,
I agree with that. I agree with
um,
that.
you know, like for me, I have a lot of faith in psychedelics, but I mean, they are, how to say it, they are the medium and not the message. You know, they're our allies and not the end goal. And I think that, you know, they have the capacity to help us in a very big way. It's hard to say whether they are or not. I mean, I think that there is this idea that, in at least in, you know, the circles that I am kind of surrounded myself with, that yeah, like we're all waking up, and you know, consciousness is shifting and all of this stuff. And you know, I question, like, have people always said that? Or, you know, like, how can we like measure this? Or, you know, like, how do we know it's not just like we're only in our like small like social bubbles that this is happening?
Hmm.
And I think, you know, there's a general shift towards like spiritual practice and things like that. If you like look at, I don't know, some of Eckhart Tolle's videos on YouTube, you see like millions of views. Like there are so many people hungry for a sense of spirituality. But I guess my feeling is that psychedelics just, they're one tool out of many, and like I don't think they're the only one that's going to get us there. But I really hope that they can like turn enough people on, um, and just wake enough people up that they, it's not even preaching a message of psychedelics or psychedelia, but I think like at this point, I feel like our planet is in a transpersonal crisis or a spiritual crisis. And I like, it's my personal belief that this kind of spiritual crisis has led us to being like on an ecological tipping point, or where we are ecologically. And I think for me, that's one of my main things, or one of the main things that I care about when I think about plant medicines and psychedelics, because there is this individual healing that needs to take place, but we also need to heal collectively, because like the future of like human civilization depends upon it, you know.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Yeah, that was a tough question, but you answered
Yes,
beautifully.
I
So thank
tried.
you. No, that was great. All right. So I only got one more question. It's the name of the podcast. So, Jasmine Virdi, God, yay or nay?
I'd say yay, definitely.
Yay.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to believe it, just because, well, believe in God or just something greater, the Great Spirit, or whatever you name it. Because I feel like that's just my genuine experience of things. I think that this kind of greater energy or being, or whatever you want to call it, is just something that we can choose to interact with when we want to. And actually, if we listen deeply enough, we can hear it or experience it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's awesome. All right, Jasmine, thank you so much. You were an amazing guest. Please let my audience know where they can get a hold of you, and anything you want to promote, please do.
Yeah, well, I've yet to create a website. It's in the works, but you can follow me on Instagram, which is JAZZ.VIRDI. And then for the rest of it, I work for an awesome publishing company called Synergetic Press. This summer, we're going to publish a really exciting book on psychedelic integration, and another one which is by Alexander Shulgin about it's called The Nature of Drugs. So those two are very exciting. And yeah, if you stay tuned on my Instagram, I post my articles on there from time to time.
Awesome, and yeah, I'll make sure to link your Instagram into the
Everything.
podcast description. But yeah,
Why,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much, Jasmine.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me.
No worries.